Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions and the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. In this episode, I interview Alistair Wells. Alistair is another attorney outside the U.S., and I was happy to have him because of his innovative law firm, Tend.Legal. They offer fractional general counsel services to scaling businesses using subscriptions. Like other recent guests, Alistair is a thought leader in the space on LinkedIn, and I highly recommend you give him a follow after listening to this episode. Thanks as always to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes, more on them later, and remember to use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED, one word, when signing up. It lets them know you found out about them from the podcast, you get 10% off, and it really supports the show. I'd love to hear about your experience using my sponsors. Please message me on LinkedIn or email me your comments at kurbis@lawsubscribe.com. For subscriptionseminar.com, I'm taking firms off the waitlist one at a time in the order they signed up, so sign up now to get your spot in line. It is becoming a long list, and I promise I'm going to try to do something about getting through that list sooner rather than later. I'm an active participant in helping you launch the subscription model, so I can only work with so many at a time since I am running my own law firm and doing this podcast. Another way to support this show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. Alistair Wells, welcome to the Law Subscribe podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matthew.
Yeah, well, we've had a chance to talk and get to know each other, and I've learned about your practice. But just for my listeners, go ahead and introduce yourself.
So my name's Alistair Wells. I run a firm called Tend.Legal, which I started in 2020 with my wife, Shona. It was very much a lockdown pivot, starting our own firm. But we work with startups, scaling businesses, offering general commercial legal services, which cover commercial, corporate, and employment law.
Yeah, and so sort of that like general counsel as a service kind of a thing, or fractional in-house counsel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's our real focus. I mean, we work in two ways. We either have projects, which are fixed fee projects if people just need one thing. But what we're really excited about is the subscription element. It's as you say, it's fractional legal counsel. It's like having their own in-house team or an outsourced legal team for companies that would otherwise, not be able to afford that, or be able to afford perhaps one lawyer but have access to a team.
Yeah. So obviously, I love it because I do my own version of that.
Yeah.
For my jurisdiction where I'm licensed in Illinois. And if they couldn't tell from the accent, you're across the pond, right? So where are you actually located?
So I live just outside London. Our firm is fully remote, so we have team members all around the country. Mm-hmm. We use workspaces and meeting rooms in London or wherever the team are located. The flexibility of this brave new world, right?
Right. Also a great result of post-lockdown and pandemic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And for longtime listeners, maybe they'll note some of the similarities between your firm and a firm out of New York called Start Law, which is the name of the firm. Start.Law is also the URL, which Tend.Legal is also your URL. And
yes.
they're more focused in like the venture world startup space. Like that's like all they do. So they're not doing like the fractional commercial counsel type thing, but they have like there was a very similar philosophy there with the branding of the firm and the URL. Right?
Yes.
So in my opinion, whenever I hear somebody like you who's doing something similar to me, I find that as great idea validation. I had a good idea.
Yeah.
So hopefully you feel the same way hearing about that other law firm.
Yeah. I mean, even finding there was a podcast especially for law firms that offer subscription, that was great for me. It means we're not alone.
Right. We're still early though, Alistair. We're still very early in this phase.
Yeah.
And even starting with your wife, I think you're now the second person who is working with their spouse that I've interviewed.
Okay.
And I mean, that could be a whole podcast episode dedicated to what that's like. But just quickly, like, what has it been like starting this with your partner?
It's been great. It was, she's a lawyer as well, but hadn't been practicing for a few years while our children were small. And when the first lockdown came around in March 2020, she was at a point where she was starting to think about going back to work, not quite sure what she wanted to do. So we had this idea, and it just made so much sense, both from being excited about the idea for its own reasons, but also for our family. being able to work in a really flexible way, which allowed her, well, both of us, I suppose, to be around for the kids a bit more. And so we have quite distinct roles in the business. As I say, she is a lawyer, but she's not practicing in the firm. She handles, well, I'd say she's the operations director, perhaps, or she handles everything else other than the legal practice, covering marketing, finance, accounts, systems, operations, IT. And we're gradually getting people in to help her with that, because it's as we get bigger, it's more complex, and it's too much for one person. But it's she's done everything. So I think in terms of, I suppose, to answer your question, working with your spouse, I think my tip would be make sure you have distinct roles, and that's where I think it's worked for us. We know which are our areas, and we don't tread on each other's toes too much.
Yeah. So then, now I want to get that story of like how you came to the subscription model. So before you left to start your own firm, you were working at another firm billing time, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, at my last firm, so I'd been at the firm for 13 years, and I was a partner there. We did work on a time basis. We did do fixed fee work as well, and that was, it was, but time was very much at the center of it. So if we're doing a fixed fee, we were thinking, well, how long is it going to take us? How many hours is that? Let's, add some contingency and let's agree a fee. And so that was kind of all I knew of how things worked. I can't remember exactly when it was I started thinking about different pricing. I know it was a big part of what we wanted to do when we, in the early days of thinking about the firm, was we knew that we wanted to move away from time-based billing because clients hate it. It's all the usual reasons that I'm sure your listeners have heard a million times. And so we were focusing on kind of fixed fee. I was reading about value pricing and sort of really trying to get my head around all of that and learning as much as I could. And it was actually, I think we'd had the idea early on or the thought, perhaps, would a subscription model work for a law firm? And I think the reason we had this thought is that I'd been working with companies for a long time, and kind of realized that where I liked to be was working with those companies that I got to know their business really well. They saw me as kind of their lawyer. Even if I couldn't help with this specific issue, I could kind of give them a steer or suggest who they should talk to about it. And so it was like really kind of developing those relationships and thinking about that. So that's where the value is, and thinking, well, maybe that's a subscription, because it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? It's almost called crying out to be a subscription. So we'd had this thought, but not really explored it very much. And then I think it was after we'd actually started the firm, I heard a podcast. There's a podcast by Lucy Dickens, who is in Australia, called Doing Law Differently. And she had a guest on it called Stanislav Roth, who is Australian lawyer. He runs a firm called Tend.Legal in Sydney. And he was talking about the subscription. They work on a subscription basis. And it just made so much sense to me. And in the end, what we adopted for our model was very much, I say inspired. Copied would probably be a more accurate term, but it made so much sense. We thought, well, let's do it like that. And we tried it with a few. Well, I think initially I did having heard this podcast, I did a LinkedIn post about it, just sort of saying, well, I heard about this idea and subscription law on a subscription basis. Here's what the benefits would be. What do you think? And it was a really good discussion. Lots of people got involved. Some people saying, yes, this sounds like the future. Some people saying it will never work. You're an idiot. Not in so many words, but explaining, there's lots of reasons why it would be difficult or why, it's not going to work. So, but eventually we thought, well, let's just try it. And we raised it with a few clients that of our existing clients, we thought, who might be up for this? Who do we know well enough that there's that level of trust that they try it, and if it doesn't work on either side, we're okay with saying let's end that experiment and move on. And we identified a few, and I think in the early days were two 3 or 4 clients that signed up quite quickly and really liked the idea. We had no real idea how to price it, but with the kind of there was an element of flexibility within our model, so that we sort of said, well, look, this is going to be the price. We'll review it from time to time. We don't want to change it too often, but it has to work for both of us. It's a commercial arrangement, and it has to make sense. And so that, I think, gave us the confidence. We didn't tie them in for any fixed period, so that gave them the confidence that they could leave anytime. So we really wanted to make it as easy as possible, and we just tried it out with, as I say, with these 3 or 4 firms, and it worked well. It's a very different experience with each of the clients. Some of them used it all the time, and we did loads of work. Some of them, we'd check in with them every month, and we have a few projects, but not loads. And they say, "That's don't worry, we know you're there. We love the fact is knowing that we can call on you when we need you." And so kind of, I think we probably did it for maybe 9 months to a year before we actually then put it on the website and said, this is something we're doing, and advertised it. And at that point, we got a few more clients as well. And yeah, it's just gone from there, really. With the more we do it, the more we've learned. And I think at the outset, it was the benefit, the thing I thought would be the benefit to clients. I thought, well, this is great because it gives them predictable legal spend, rather than lumpy project work legal spend. It's just the same amount every month. This is great for the clients. And, obviously great for us because it's recurring revenue, all of that stuff. But I think the thing we found was actually it wasn't just about the money. At the first, early on, you think, oh, it's just a different way of charging. And actually, I think it promotes a different way of working together, which we found, we are instantly kind of much more aligned with the client. We feel like we're part of their team. So we get to know what's going on in the business much earlier. We have, as I say, a monthly check-in meeting with every subscription client just to see how they're doing, see what's happening in the business. And there's that real sense that actually we are part of that organization, and we have a shared Slack channel with most clients, or if they use Slack, we'll have a shared Slack channel, so they can just ping messages to us really easily, which they and so they love that kind of ease, and it's just removing all of the friction. I mean, which I'm sure is something that probably every one of your guests has pointed out is a benefit of subscription, because it just makes it frictionless.
Yeah, you're right. And, you never know. So this could be somebody's very first episode. So I see no reason that we can't even delve into some of those benefits. But I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So like, even going back to, you were looking at value-based billing, and you were like listening to the podcast, the Doing Law Differently podcast. So I guess, that's sort of you're searching, for like how to practice law differently, and that happened to be an aptly named podcast. But like, how did you find those resources? Like, my podcast is obviously trying to be a resource to the next generation of subscription attorneys, but it didn't exist back then. And so, like, where did you go? Like, how did you even know where to look to try to practice law differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, this isn't specifically thinking about subscriptions, but thinking about once we had this idea at the outset that we wanted to start our own firm. And what appealed to us about it was this idea of creating a firm that made sense to us, that we would want to use if we were clients. And that's partly how a firm presents itself. It's partly, a much more informal approach, much more human-centric approach, using technology to make things really efficient and quick, and not office-based, and kind of just dialing down on some of the things that lawyers do that you go through your legal career and you do them because that's what you do, because you're a lawyer. And then actually, once you start questioning it, there's all these things that you think, well, it doesn't make sense to anybody else. And so I suppose that was a question as well. What would a firm look like that actually made sense to people, that people actually wanted to use, and specifically that our target clients would want to use? Because I think, for a lot of fast growth businesses or startups are just completely put off by the traditional law firm. They will not, to the point where they won't get legal advice because they think it will take too long, or they just think, it's just the formality, it's the bureaucracy behind it all. So we were kind of just questioning things, and we were looking at other industries as well. Like I don't know if it's the same in the US. I feel like in the UK, accountants are just some way ahead of lawyers in terms of sort of innovation and progressive practices. So there's quite a few accountants do something similar to a subscription or a subscription, a full-on subscription. So you'd kind of been aware of that. I was trying to think other resources. I mean, LinkedIn, I think I searched for people who were already doing different things differently within law, and found, there were quite a few firms who had started in recent years, generally people breaking away from big law, starting their own firms and being quite vocal about it. So you kind of find who to follow, and they, from that you hear about resources. And, for example, the Lucy Dickens podcast, that was something I heard about through LinkedIn somehow. I'm not sure what the connection was, but quite early on, I think once before I'd left my old firm, but when I knew I was going to, I'd kind of realized I'm going to have to get out there. I'm going to have to actually find people who might be interested in this new firm we're thinking about, and to sort of build a network. And so I did start posting around that time, started posting on LinkedIn. And because I couldn't really say at that time, I couldn't say, I'm starting a new firm, because I was still working for the old one.
I've been there. I know what that's like.
It's kind of, you have to be. So I wanted to talk. I started talking, I suppose, about values, about the things we were questioning, about the things we were thinking about, without saying, I'm starting a new firm, which I think was good, because I didn't have anything to sell, particularly at that point. I was just saying, why do we do this? What do you think about that? And through that, connected with people who were like-minded in the industry or in the profession, and sort of got to know people a bit. And really, I mean, LinkedIn has probably been our biggest source of marketing, probably our biggest source of work, partly through referrals and partly through, direct approaches to LinkedIn. But yeah, a lot from getting to know people. And it's that kind of, it's, I think someone called it asymmetric. There's a phrase, asymmetric intimacy, where people feel like they know you, you don't know them. And there's that ability to reach people is extraordinary. If you started 20 years ago, you'd be putting an advert on the back of a bus or a billboard or something, whereas actually you can talk to people directly.
And like, I mean, I expected at some point to talk about business generation, because that's a really important part. Like, you could go out and start your own innovative law firm, and you could have all the technology, right? And you could have the best business idea ever, but if you can't bring in the business, it's like, what is it worth? So it's almost like it's all important, right? And so, like, and what you talked about, how like you have nothing to sell. Even I had an attorney coach on who helps lawyers build books of business. His name's Steve Fretzen. And one of his books is even called like Sales-Free Selling. And like, that's the way to think about it. And it's hard to do when you don't have any money, like when you're not bringing in any revenue.
The pressure's on.
Yeah, you got to make money. But when you have that money, or if you can, trick yourself into that mindset of, I'm not selling anything, I'm building relationships, I'm helping people, I'm maybe challenging the status quo, or like you were doing on LinkedIn, and you still do. And everyone should go follow Alistair on LinkedIn, is you're still engaging in thought leadership, right? Like, then people, because you're helping them and because you're making them think, or you're engaging with them asynchronously, like, they eventually want to pay you to help them. And you can't rely on only that. Like, you still have to sell, and you still have to ask people to sign up, right? But like, that, I think that approach can really work. So like, what else has worked for you in terms of getting business for the firm, whether that was in the beginning or even like right now? How are you selling the subscription model to clients?
Well, so, I mean, early on, so rewinding to the beginning, I was fortunate in that I was able to bring across clients from my old firm, and that was with their blessing. It was all above board, and that gave us the start that we needed. It was great. So our early subscription clients, at least two of them they were people I'd known for a long time. I mean, as we've gone along, in terms of where do we get clients from, a lot come from referrals. So accountants we know, or other lawyers. So as I say, LinkedIn has been a good source. I've been to some in-person networking events, but and sometimes they're good and it's nice to get out and actually meet people. But compared to LinkedIn, I just don't see it as effective a use of my time. But the beauty of the subscription model is once you have a client, unless you do something terrible or you just they don't like you, you're going to keep them there. And so you're not always constantly chasing for new work. I mean, we always have our eyes open. I am trying to get better at being a bit more proactive in getting out there and talking to people, or just calling people up that are contacts, or actually selling. I mean, I think it's you mentioned it there. The sales. What was it? The sales free selling? The thought of sales is horrifying to most lawyers, I think, isn't it? Or having to go out and sell your services, and I think how you described it is so helpful. It's not, you're not necessarily giving people the hard sell, cold calling, or it's talking to them and seeing how you can help them. And
right.
Once you think of it like that, it becomes a lot easier. I'm not a natural salesperson, but actually, I think once I get in front of somebody who has a business where it's a good fit, and I get excited about their business, and you just sometimes you have that kind of that chemistry that it's actually you both want to work together, and it feels like it's happening yourself. But to get in front of those people, I think you have to have that stage before, whether that's LinkedIn, the kind of marketing element, or the being visible as a new business. You have to be as visible as possible, and as a new business owner, you are the face of that business, which can be quite intimidating at times. I mean, if you're an introvert, which, well, a lot of the time I feel like I am, that thought of having to actually get out and make public statements and write things, for lawyers, having to write anything down that is going to last for eternity and on the internet is a worrying thought, right? You don't write anything unless you have to usually, but
yeah,
very different mindset.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are on LinkedIn and like following other thought leaders in the legal space, I think they all have had a similar message to that, where it was like, I'm so scary to like start posting, because once it's on the internet, it's forever. Yeah, but I also think, and while I haven't specifically asked it, though I do have some other theories that I've developed over these years of me doing these interviews, is there tend to be some similarities, and they're not all overlapping. But it's like a multifaceted Venn diagram with so many circles of all the different subscription attorneys, and so many aspects overlap. And I feel like introvert, of which I count myself as one, is one of those, not 100% present for all attorneys who are innovating with the model, but I feel like that's part of it for a lot of them. And we play the role of extrovert when we have to. I mean, that's what I do on this podcast, right? And once you get over that hump of, I don't like going in front of a room and talking to people or strangers, like after you talk to that first stranger, you start to get a little bit more comfortable again, because you're like, oh yeah, I got this. I have skills. Like, I've developed these skills. Yeah. I spent a lot of money in learning to get some of these skills in law school. And so you get past that eventually, I think. And some other key terms that you used for the subscription economy, which I highly recommend the book, Tian Zhou's book, Subscribed. I don't know if you've come across that, Alistair.
I have read that, yeah.
So that talk goes all into the subscription economy, but like monthly recurring revenue you've talked about, removing friction or low friction touch points, and keeping clients in engagement with low friction, and retention, right? Because it's always going to be cheaper for you as a business, law firm or otherwise, to maintain existing clients like you were just talking about and keep them happy versus having to go out and get new clients. But that is something that, so to stick with the sales part of that conversation, I've had some people on the podcast that have said that they've tried to offer subscriptions to existing clients, but they were so used to the billable hour that they just wanted to keep paying it, and they actually had an easier job signing up new clients. And Jess Birkin was like, I'll give you the option, subscription or billable. And after a year of offering that, no new client picked billable, that she just only offered subscription. And so I'm curious to know, like, what was that conversation like when you were like, hey, let's move away from billable and we're going to do subscription? Because obviously you were successful to some extent with that. So like, I think my listeners would be interested to hear like the actual, like, obviously no, you're not waiving attorney-client privilege. So these are just hypothetical conversations, of course. But what was like, give us as specific as you can what those conversations were like. When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional-only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high-quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSubscribed at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney, or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form at scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSubscribed at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show.
So for us, I mean, we didn't Tend.Legal, we've never billed for time. I think maybe there was one or two like litigation cases that we brought across. Litigation is a bit more difficult, but at the outset, we said, look, we're moving away from time. It's going to be fixed fee. So clients that I've been working with for a long time, we'd already had that conversation, and that was an easy one because we're saying, look, we know you don't like these surprises, and the thing is, I'd always known, and even when I was billing for time, I very rarely would give someone a bill that they weren't expecting. You know, at the outset, we would usually give an estimate, and yes, that could change because we're billing time, but usually we would, if it was going to be different, we would let them know early on. So, you know, but of course, then saying to them, actually, we're just going to let you know the price up front. That's going to be the price for that scope. That's an easy conversation. So they kind of moved on to that. And then when we started talking about subscriptions, in some cases, it was really easy. In some cases, we'd have a client. There was one client that I think he saw my post on LinkedIn and said, that sounds like exactly what we're looking for. And so, you know, it was an open door. It was, we outlined, you know, we discussed how it might work. It was, and that was fine. With others, it's not an easy sell. You know, it's not something, because it's something new, it's not something that people are used to. And often, well, it depends how used to, because some clients will come to us and they've not really used lawyers before. They're an early stage. And for really early stage startups, generally, they don't have the money for ongoing legal support in that way, unless they've got funding, but it's not always a priority. Where you've got some that either, you know, for whatever reason, there's a bit more complexity in their business, or they just actually appreciate the value of legal support, but they're not used to working with lawyers, perhaps. Sometimes they will think, you know, why would I need ongoing support? I'm tiny, you know, I just need one or two things. And sometimes that's the truth, you know, they don't need very much. And, you know, with those ones, generally we end up working on doing a fixed fee project with them if there's something specific they need. But sometimes people will be surprised how much they do actually need lawyers once they get going. And even if they haven't signed up for a subscription, you know, we'll work with them on one thing, and then we'll still check in from time to time, not in the same way that we would with a subscription client, but, you know, every few months. And very often they'll say, oh yeah, there's that other thing, there's this contract we've got, or we need a new we need you to look at our employment contracts, or we've got this query. And actually, I think they become surprised by how much they do need. So there's that, for those kind of clients, it can be difficult because if they're not using lawyers in the first place, they don't have anything to compare it to in terms of spend.
Right.
And even for clients that have used lawyers before, it is so important, I think, when we have that conversation, to explain the benefits of what we're doing, and to explain that this is not just providing the same service that a previous lawyer provided, but we're going to spread the cost over a year. It's actually presenting it in such a way that we're distinguishing ourselves in terms of the service. And I don't know if you read Time's Up by Paul Dunn and Ron Baker? Yeah. So it's great. I just read it recently. And the reason I mention it is they talk about, for professional services firms, the importance of kind of presenting what you do and thinking about what you do. And it's not, we're not selling time. We know that. We're not selling pieces of work even. We're not selling experience, which is something we talk about a bit, legal experience. But actually, we're selling transformation. We're saying to companies, look, we can transform the legal parts of your business, which will lead to transformation in the rest of your business. It will free you up to grow.
Yes.
You'll grow strong, and you'll manage risk properly. You have proper contracts in place that don't leave you massively exposed, all of this stuff. And so there's that kind of element, I think, in any sales conversation of like having to explain what it is we're going to do, how we're going to do it, this close working relationship we're going to have, and what the benefits for them will be. And then kind of coming onto the price and saying that this is what, how we're going to price it. I mean, as part of how we do this is we'll have that conversation, and a lot of it will be scoping. We'll be asking them questions about their business. So how, what's the turnover? How many employees? How many do you have standard contracts? How many contracts do you have per month? Do you have a shareholders agreement in place? All of these things. So we get as much information as we can about that business. We then explain, the benefits of what we do, how we do it, and what working together would look like. And then we go away. And for us, we don't have standard pricing yet. That may follow, but at the moment, we haven't managed to wrap our heads around it. But so what we do is look at the information we've gathered in that scoping call, and kind of based on it, looking at the value to the client, looking at the complexity and how much of our resource it's going to take as well, and kind of come up with a monthly fee that we think is fair, and we go back with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll have.
I do want to dive into that in a second here, but just some quick commentary before we lose track of it. Is you talked about the latent legal market, right? Which is the people or clients who have never hired, be they individuals or businesses, never hired a lawyer before. And so they have nothing to compare it to, right? Like I like to refer to that as, and I can't remember who coined the phrase, but the latent legal market. This is the market that has gone long unserved by lawyers because lawyers are too expensive. And I have a really hard time selling to the latent legal market, but they're the ones where the most need is and the most business opportunity, right?
It is a big opportunity. And I think, part of our model was aimed to appeal to that latent legal market. I love that expression, by the way. I hadn't got a name for them, but I do now. We had this idea that we wanted to appeal to people that didn't like lawyers, and there are a few of them out there. It turns out it's so like creative businesses, for example, so creative agencies, they are just so completely different to law firms that they struggle to communicate. Those two, it's just a very different mindset. It's a different way of communicating. And I remember at my old firm once, it was reasonably progressive, but it was, I suppose, traditional in some respects. And going down to a meeting with my suit on and my tie, and for a meeting with this really successful creative business, the owner was a fair bit younger than me, and he sat there in his jeans and t-shirt, and I'm in my suit. And he starts the meeting by apologizing to me. He said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't dress up." And it's like, well, you're the client. It's your meeting. You don't need to apologize. I should apologize for overdressing. And I think sometimes as attorneys, we put up these barriers, don't we? I don't know if we even think about it, but they are barriers, and that might be how we dress. It might be how we speak or the language we use that actually makes it inaccessible to some people. And of course, you have to tailor that to the right audience. Of course, you're not going to go into a board meeting at a listed company in a t-shirt and jeans, but for a lot of the businesses we work with, that's exactly what they expect. And so there have been instances where, we've had a meeting with a client and we use these workspaces in London. And I've met like a new client who's coming for a first time meeting, met them in the kind of reception there. And it's quite a buzzy workspace. There's people around, there's coffee, and they've got cool meeting rooms and stuff. And they say, oh, wow, well, this isn't what we expected. You don't look like a lawyer. But in a good way, they're kind of, that's not meant as an insult. So I think, reaching those people is partly about presentation and communication, and it's understanding how they work and how they do business. But then, of course, it is hard for a lot of those businesses to sell what you do, or to get them to see the importance of investing in legal support. Because of course, right, they're thinking if they've been going for 10 years with a contract that they copied off a competitor, they say, well, we've never had a problem, so it's probably fine. and you're like, well, you haven't had a problem yet.
Yeah,
you might have 10 years worth of problems coming.
Yeah, and it is hard to sell problem avoidance. I mean, it's hard to sell problem avoidance up front. Like usually when people do have a problem and they come to you and you help them solve it and they know you have a subscription, it's a lot easier than to sell future problem avoidance because you just helped them solve a problem. And I find that that's the easiest time to sell the subscription is like they came to you for a problem. Now, I'm not the attorney, and maybe you feel the same way, that like I'm here to put out fires because that's going to take a lot of my time, which I'm not billing. And it's really expensive. And like, you know what? That's what every other lawyer does. So you could go to them. Yeah. For small fires, then that's like a good problem for me to solve because I'd much rather solve problem avoidance than problem solving. Although I will, of course, solve problems. It sounds like you're in a similar business. And to the transformation point that you made, yes, we are selling transformations, and the way that I explain it, like in my when I'm in front of a room or if I'm trying to sell somebody without selling them, but they ask me, they prompt me, it's like, well, you outsource your legal to me, so you, the business owner, never have to worry about legal ever again because I'm going to get to know you, I'm going to get to know your business, so I'll be able to take care of those questions. That's the benefit of the subscription. I'm getting to know your business, so you outsource your legal to me, so you could focus on your business, the things that you're good at that make you money. Or maybe you're already making a lot of money and you just don't want to deal with the legal stuff anymore. Now you could just go do what makes you happy. And now instead of having to negotiate and worry about all these contracts, you just get a quick call or email or text from me. It's like, hey, just want to check in on this, this, and this. Are we good to go on this contract? And they're like, yeah. And they're on a beach somewhere, right? Because now they have that time. They don't think about how much time they're spending in their business on legal stuff because they don't necessarily think that it's legal stuff.
Yeah. And that's it, I think. And that's a much more appealing reason to invest in legal than problem avoidance. And particularly, when you're working with startup owners, entrepreneurs, and you say, oh, there's risks if you don't do this. And they're like, I've just started a business. I'm okay with risk. I'm 90% of businesses fail in the first 3 years. I know this. So it's that kind of, I think positioning as someone who is going to help them grow and grow in the right way as well, of course, because it's that, yes, you're taking boring, complicated work off their plate, but also you're helping them grow in a strong way that they're not going to suddenly have some sort of claim that is going to completely derail their business that they've worked so hard to create. So I think there's a lot in that.
Yeah. So going back to your pricing, it says on your website, so I recommend everyone go to Tend.Legal/packages where you list your subscription and project types of work that you'll do for clients. It starts at £500 a month, but it does say that it's bespoke. So that's the lowest you'll go for clients. And for some clients, I'm sure that's that's the right value for, what you're giving them and what their needs are. But then surely it can go up, as representation goes
For
on and
sure.
as their business grows, and all that. And I still think that is incredibly accessible for small businesses to start out, right? So why 500 to start, and why still bespoke? You started to get into it and I stopped you. So answer those two questions for me.
So 500, I mean, we wanted to put a minimum price on the website to give people some expectation. So we're not having, sales calls and then you realize that they just don't have that budget. It's 500 is what we felt was the minimum price that we could offer some sort of meaningful service to a really small business. And within the 500 category, it tends to be really quite small businesses, usually one or two owners, not too much ongoing stuff, but legal support when they need it. The way we structure the subscription is quite flexible. So we say, I mean, it's different for different clients. So for some people, there's one area they want a subscription. So for some clients, for example, it will only be employment law. For some, it will only be contract reviews. And the kind of frequency and the value of those contracts might vary so massively between clients, but it's very difficult to say, okay, we're going to have these standard tiers and these are going to be the prices. And we've tried, and it's still something that I toy with and have various spreadsheets that I try and work out, well, if we were going to have standard tiers of pricing, what would they look like? And so to rewind slightly, I mean, in terms of our scope, within the scope we agree, it is largely a kind of all you can eat, which I don't like the expression all you can eat, because it sounds like it's one of those kind of cheap buffets, and I always eat too much at those things. But maybe a concierge service is a better way of describing it, where really there aren't limits as such. We'll do whatever they need. There is the flexibility in the pricing going forwards that we can have that conversation and say, hey, look, I think we need to review how we're pricing this. So that's, I mean, I suppose that's why it's bespoke, to sort of answer your question, is that we haven't found a way of standard pricing it that will encapsulate the kind of wildly different expectations of different clients. It may be that as we go, we work towards that.
So, I mean, just a recommendation, because I took the inverse approach, which is I did specific tiers of pricing first, and then came to find that for some clients, it simply doesn't work. So I do offer bespoke pricing when it makes sense to have that conversation with a client, because one of my set tiers is maybe a little too much or a little too little in terms of price or services that correspond with that. But the fact that you're taking this lack of limitations in legal services approach is just anticipated need based on the size of the business, kind of a evaluation of what their needs are, projected moving forward kind of a thing. I know it's a little bit like, for lawyers, it's like a little bit of a gut feeling, and you maybe want more certainty for that type of thing. But I've leaned into that as well. And now I say you get so many projects a month. I even just had a lawyer DM me on LinkedIn, and he was like, what does project mean? Are you like if somebody gives you 100-page project, is that one project? And it's like, well, maybe, it depends. Are most of your pages benign? Then is it like a 10-page contract with 100 exhibits attached to it? Now, maybe we're talking about it's really multiple projects in one. And I'll just have that conversation with the client when they send it to me. Hey, just so you know, this really looks like it's 2 or 3 projects going towards their 10 or however many for the month, right? And projects carry over. So if I'm negotiating or drafting and helping with a contract that goes from month 1 to month 2, that continues to count against that total amount for month to month. It's not cumulative, right? It resets, but then continues. And so I've gone in on that all-in value. But I do have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And if they fall in between that and they're not comfortable going up to tier 2, because that is a way to capture a lot more value for your firm if you have that set tier structure. Sorry, you've exhausted tier 1, service levels, you got to go to tier 2. And if they don't want to do that, you're happy to do a bespoke plan with them. But they really think they should move up a tier. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think about the way that I've approached it?
Yeah, I mean, that does make sense to me. I think I can see the appeal of having that kind of framework in place at the outset, that you can say to people, well, look, we've discussed your needs. You are in this tier. If ever that increases and you find that we find ourselves in this tier, then it's easy for you to have that conversation. You can go to them and say, well, look, remember what we said about the tiers, that here you are now. That's you. And so we don't have that. And the thing that I think we've learned early on, we didn't even really record our expectation of how much work or what kind of work it was going to be. And that's something we've refined. So what we found with the early clients, we said, yeah, it's wonderful service. We'll do whatever you need. Fixed monthly fee. Let's get to it, and working away. And then allowed for that flexibility, but having the conversation, having that fee review conversation is slightly more difficult if you don't have a benchmark at the outset, because we're kind of then having to say, well, look, we're doing a lot more work than we anticipated, so we think your fee should increase. And they're saying, well, what did you anticipate? You said it was all you can eat. And so it's kind of, I mean, fortunately, we do have really good relationships with our clients, and we're able to have those discussions. And generally, we've been slow to have the fee review. So it's got to a point, well, with one client, they said to me, hey, we think we should be paying a bit more for this, which was,
that's amazing.
Doesn't happen very often for lawyers, does it? But that's, I mean, it really was low because we wanted to learn, and we were, but it does put the emphasis on, it puts the onus on us to have that good relationship with our clients. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's something that I have been thinking about recently is should we have more of a sort of framework in place, or something that is a ladder that we can say, look, you're at this stage now, and now you're at this stage. One thing we do now that we've improved since the beginning is have, as I mentioned earlier, we have this scoping conversation, and we record that in a fact-find form, which we share with them and say, look, this price is based upon the information you've given us. So then at least we have something to point to. And then at the fee review, we can say, well, look, it's largely in line with what you told us at the beginning. Let's keep the price where it is. Or we say, well, look, we're doing a lot more of this kind of work. We think the price needs to increase. And it's a negotiation. I mean, I don't think there's a perfect way to do it. I think for us, we did it the way we did it because it was simple. And it's that balance, isn't it? Because as lawyers, of course, we want to screw things down. We want to make everything as clear as possible and define everything. But you try doing that, and it very quickly becomes impossible or so complicated that they're never going to go for it. It just becomes over lawyered. It's a tricky one, though.
Over lawyered, great podcast name. That's a great, right? So there you go. And you talk about all the things that are over lawyered. Anyway, I can't help myself with idea generation. So wrapping up here, just a couple more questions for you. In terms of technology for implementation, like what's some of the subscriptions you're using to power your subscription and flat fee law firm? Yeah,
so we use Clio for case management. What else do we use? I mentioned Slack earlier, which is a great one for communication, particularly with a lot of our clients use that internally, so they love it. I remember with one of our clients, who's an IT company, mentioning, phoning them up saying, "Oh, do you use Slack? We could do a shared Slack channel." And he said, "Wait, you could do that? That's amazing! Wow, I've never heard of a lawyer being on Slack." And those little things that they just love, and it makes life easy. What else do we use? We haven't got into. I know when we spoke before, you talked about some of the AI tools, which contract reviews, which I think we do need to start thinking about a bit more in terms of is finding something that actually produces some output that is, usable and working out how to use that. There's a few things we're looking into.
Well, what about like payments, like payment processing? What do you use for payments?
Yeah. So there's a tool in the UK, it's called Legal, Legl, which is onboarding. So for us, we have to, as a regulated law firm, we have to do client ID checks. I don't know if it's the same for you, but they can verify their ID through this platform. with use a camera phone and their passport. They can sign our engagement letter. They can make a payment all on the same platform. So onboarding becomes really easy. And yeah, I mean, that's, I think what else we use. I'm sure there are hundreds of other things that I can't remember at the moment, but those are the main ones, certainly.
How did you spell that? What is that technology called?
So it's legal.com. So legal. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's specifically for law firms. It's a KYC platform.
And then what about like non-legal tech? So like, are you Google Workspace, Microsoft 365, both? Like,
We're Microsoft. Yeah, we are Microsoft. We do, for some clients, we work with them on their Google Docs, and the juggle between the two is tricky.
Are you using like scheduling platforms like Calendly, Acuity, like any of these things?
So we use Bookings. I use bookings.com because that's free. We use Teams for most of our kind of scheduled meetings. We use Slack internally for video calls and chat. We use Notion for our kind of intranet, Tend.Legal wiki, which the idea is that we anytime we learn how to do something, we put a note on Notion, and then the next time somebody asks that question, we just give them that link.
You are the first attorney to mention Notion. I'm familiar with Notion. I've been trying to think about how to integrate it with my firm, but I'm a true solo. So like knowledge management for internal firm, maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I've been looking at it for like a knowledge base for clients to get access to like legal information and knowledge. So that's what I've been trying to figure out how I want to implement that. But Notion is an incredible tool.
A useful tool, yeah, it's brilliant. And I mean, there's so much you can do with it. And one thing I'm kind of thinking about is whether we can use it for project management. They have it's a new function on it that's project management. So you can have like a Kanban board. You can have so where we're working on legal projects together, or business projects internally, we could use it to manage those. And you can have, you could use it to build a whole client database. I think you could probably have most of a kind of a client management system through it. It's just having the time to explore these things, isn't it, and get to grips with them and then implement them.
Yeah. So my last substantive question for you is, if you could go back and tell yourself, when you were going to get started with starting your own firm and you hadn't quite come to the subscription model yet, but like something now that you wish you would have known then. And this is also to all other attorneys who are listening who haven't made the plunge yet. So this is also your chance to try to convince lawyers to either like go start your own firm or start using the subscription model. Like what would you have told yourself back then?
I think I would say, don't be afraid to be different. Don't go for half measures, go all in on something new and different. If, you have to believe it's the right thing, you have to ask people and test the waters a bit, but don't hold back. Don't try and recreate something somebody else is already doing. Although I admit we did that with our subscription, but with the mainstream,
right?
And find people, find your community, find people who are doing similar things as well. Not just to copy them, but to have that support, have that kind of exchange of ideas, and those are the things I think that have helped us so far.
Yeah. Well, great, Alistair. Thank you so much. And my actual last question for you is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
It's no, it's not.
Why?
You can take it from, I mean, a sandwich has slices of bread, not a roll. That's a roll. It may be a cultural thing, but I feel like the sandwich was invented in this country, so you can take it on by the Earl of Sandwich, no less.
I haven't. No one's laid claim to origin of sandwich being able to do that. That's a new one.
Yeah, it was the Earl of Sandwich, no less, who invented it.
All right. Well,
So,
maybe I have to start asking another question. I guess that's been solved. That's been answered now.
yeah, it's done.
Where can people find you? Obviously LinkedIn, but the law firm is Tend.Legal, we mentioned as well. Anywhere else people can find you? What's the best way for them to reach out?
Those are the main places. LinkedIn is the best place.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Matthew. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for sponsoring this show. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with someone you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.